I took ADHD medication for 30 days and the results are unlike anything that I could have anticipated. I was an adult. I was 36 before I got diagnosed. I already have a wife. We have a kid on the way. I work from home, a lot on my plate. And I want to walk you through the steps that led me to get a diagnosis in the first place. We are going to start out with exactly what my experience was on the medication over the last 4 weeks. Then we are going to talk about the signs that I had that I ignored for so much of my life that some of you might be able to relate to, either in yourself or someone else. Then we're going to talk about the structure of ADHD, what makes it what it is, how we think it works. Then we're going to talk about some of the controversies and the questions, because Lord knows I still have some. So starting out with my experience, I'm currently on Vyvanse, which is a slow-release amphetamine. Things like Adderall are quicker, which allows you to regulate the dosage better throughout the day, but it's also a pain in the butt to take pills multiple times throughout the day. Vyvanse Ideas, I take it early, and it lasts throughout most of the day. Now, so far, that has been my experience. However, it means that your peak engagement with it is going to fluctuate. I didn't really notice that. I think that kind of comes out in the noise because generally from morning to when I go to sleep, everything's already much better than it was before. So I don't really have complaints about that. I would just say though, don't make the mistake I did, which is to be so eager to take it that you take it at 11:30 or 12 and then you're up till 2 a.m. because it is a stimulant. So it will keep you up if you take it later. But I take it 7, 8 o'clock, carries me throughout the day. I'm fine by the time I go to sleep. Now, here's the thing. I went into this thinking that all the stimulants I was used to leaning on, caffeine, energy drinks, I had a cigarette phase because the nicotine actually helped me work to such a substantial degree that I was willing to take on that habit. Not sustainable, not recommended. And then, of course, there are illegal drugs, illegal stimulants that people will lean on, like writers and people that work in high stress, high performing jobs. And again, you don't want to go that route. But my experience with all of those things was the feeling of being heavily stimulated, of having the foot to the gas pedal to the floor, just punching through the bottom of the car and just trying to go, 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 go. So having your brain just turn things out, it was a way to bully through a lot of the obstacles I was facing, but it wasn't sustainable. And it didn't really improve the way I thought, which is what I had suspected was the problem. So it's a crutch. It's something that can help you out, but it's not something that's going to actually fix the problem. My experience with Vyvanse, nothing like that. I really thought I was going to be hyper tuned up. I thought it was going to be feeling like I was on stimulants all day. That's what I was ready for. And what kind of confirmed for me that this is actually a condition that I was suffering from, that I was trying to talk myself out of getting addressed, is the fact that when I take it, I'm chill. It's not that I feel like my brain is expending more energy. If anything, I feel like it's expending less because the efficiency is so much higher. So when I sit down to write, I don't feel like I'm writing for 6 hours. I feel like my engagement with something I enjoy doing is rewarding, and I'm able to stay focused, and my thoughts form very easily, and I can make maneuvers laterally to engage with those ideas that do not cost a lot of energy. So looking back, it feels like everything up until now was trying to get motivated and do these big projects with one foot just hard on the brakes. And instead of taking my foot off the brake, I was just taking stimulants that would just hit the gas harder. And this isn't anything like that. That's something you'll hear. It's like if you have the ADHD, these stimulants actually calm you. They remove anxiety. They allow you to engage better with your life. So far, that has been how my experience is. Easy thinking, my memory just works. That was a big problem I had with my working memory. When I speak, I go off on little asides. I use parentheses a lot when I write to just pack so much information into one sentence because I think it's a good way to approach this type of informative content that I make. And if I take a little aside, if I spend a little too much time away from the main point, I forget the main point. I forget the conclusion I was working to, and I forget who asked the question and why. Not good for somebody that has to interview people, write content, and so on. I don't procrastinate nearly as much. That was always a running joke in my family about procrastination. I can only describe it as an extreme level of discomfort when I would sit down with something to do, even if it was something I really enjoyed. I enjoyed drawing and writing and reading and making content. But if I knew I had options, making myself fixate on this was incredibly uncomfortable to where it didn't make sense. I didn't know how to verbalize the fidgetiness, I just felt like there was something else that had to be done. It was so bizarre. And that's essentially gone away. Now, when I get a text message, an email, something I would put off, not do, forget about, then get a bunch of anxiety over because I forgot about it, but it's still looming over my head. Now I tend to just do it. Even my wife pointed it out that I respond to texts faster, and the anxiety as a result. That's the big thing. Anxiety has gone down a lot because I'm not putting up this filthy pile of chores and tasks and to do things in the corner. Instead, it's like I'm checking things off. I know that I can engage with things. If not, I have a way of scheduling them. And all of these systems I've developed over the years are so much better now because I have that capacity. And of course, why people do it, they work longer, they focus longer, and we live in a world where that is coming at a premium. So the thing that always gave me pause was that 100% of people benefit in those capacities from taking this. Well, how does that then lend itself to the idea that this is unique to me and something that I need, and I'm not just trying to get ahead in the cheapest way possible? Now, the work and focus, again, it's very real. At the end of a long workday, I don't feel like I put in a long workday, and I actually feel like I can keep going. But it almost feels like after so many years of going with the brakes on, that there's kind of like a conditioning or tolerance that I've built up. It's like if you're a Piccolo in Dragon Ball Z and you have like the weighted vest that holds you down, the second you take it off, it's like, oh, game on. So that's kind of how I relate to that. But it absolutely does make everybody work and focus longer, which is why it gets abused. Now, the signs that I ignored. To start out, I couldn't find shit. I was talking to my mom about this, like, hey, mom, bet you didn't know your almost 40-year-old son had ADHD. And she was flabbergasted because I never had signs. I did well in school, like so many people do. They mask it. They come up with ways of getting around it. Nobody thinks that there's an issue there, but you feel it when you're trying to engage with this stuff. But I said, hey, yeah, remember when you used to send me into grocery stores? And I almost felt like you were punishing me because if you wanted me to go get it, I knew I would be in there too long. I knew you would get mad and yell at me. And that was like a running theme because I wasn't stupid. I knew how the grocery store was segmented and where things were generally. And I knew how to ask questions. But I'd be in there for like a bar of soap and some toilet paper. I'd be in there for a half hour and you would get mad. Remember that? Yeah, that's part of that. So I would always get lost. Never had a good sense of directions, couldn't find anything. And especially if I'm looking at a mass of things, it's just noise. I can't ping pong around very efficiently. And also, I would lose things on top of that because my memory wasn't that great. Working memory suffers quite a bit. So, not finding things, that was a big point of stress. Mind wandering, that's another one. If you talk to somebody, you might see them blank out. I'm constantly being accused when I talk to my wife of blankly staring in the corner where she can see the wheels turning in my head as I'm thinking about anything else than what she's talking about. Now, it's one thing in a marriage, but this affected me professionally because when I'm writing, my mind would wander. When I'm supposed to be focused on a task, my mind would wander. When I would be interviewing people that I held in high esteem, professionals in the field, people I was actively trying to learn from and very interested to talk to, I had to stop doing that because I couldn't trust myself not to wander off mentally before they finished their sentence. More than a few times, the sentence would end and I would recognize that I hadn't paid attention for the last several minutes and I had to fill up the space while not only not sounding like I was an idiot who was falling asleep, but without disrespecting the other person. And that's something that gave me so much anxiety that I decided to pull the plug. I stopped doing it altogether because I couldn't keep my mind from wandering. Similarly, when I fall asleep or if I have songs stuck in my head, very hard to focus on tasks. Forgetfulness is a big one. I forgot everything, people's names. I need 5-6 passes to learn somebody's name. Working memory is a big thing here. This is what you'll hear people talk about. Imagine you have 6, 7, 8 slots to keep things in that you can kind of juggle at once when you're trying to multitask, have a conversation, keep track of multiple things. Well, imagine if you only had 2. Every time something goes in, something else goes out. And that's kind of what it felt like when I would write, talk, have conversations. I couldn't keep track of my own train of thought, let alone other people's. Reading was a chore, always having to reread things multiple times. Painful procrastination. I already talked about feeling uncomfortable trying to sit down and make myself do something. My preferred way was to wait till the last minute. I did that all through school. I'm a master crammer. Although that's the worst way to manage your time efficiently, it is the worst way to learn anything. But I was really good at it because if I have room to move around, my brain will focus on the other things I could be doing, and distraction is inevitable. When I was in a 1-bedroom apartment in the throes of COVID, with my wife taking up the kitchen and living room to do her conference calls, I was stuck in our bedroom. And I filmed. My channel had the biggest growth in that time. I wrote 3 books, and the confinement of not being able to move around, and the same thing happens with deadlines. The confinement of not having the option of putting it off almost made focus so much better and so much easier. So I really look back on that, and that was like a huge sign. And now that I don't do that, I don't put things off. I don't build up the pile in the corner of things I'll get to later that loom over my head. And then I get a bunch of shame and anxiety over it because I'm going to forget about it and it's still looming over my head. I'm not addressing it. Now, when I get a text message and email, something I can do right now, I just do it. It's super beautiful. My life is going off a lot better for it. Distractions on distractions. Again, that goes into being forgetful, not being able to pay attention, not being able to sit still. Your brain just doing everything but what you're supposed to do. And then I was often called airheaded or oblivious. In fact, the one thing that still stings is when a friend of mine, I was 18 or 19, asked a girl what she thought of me, and the word she used to describe me was oblivious. That still stings to this day, but I had a reputation for that. And it's one I didn't know I had until I was in my late teens or into adulthood because I always did well in school. And that's how I kind of valued my capabilities. Then I got out into the real world and figured out that no, you have to pay attention, you have to stay engaged. And I couldn't do that. I took AP calculus in high school just fine, but working as a cashier at a grocery store, I had my drawer constantly come up short because even though the system told me the change to give, I couldn't focus consistently enough to give out the right change. So thus I felt stupid. I continuously felt incapable where other people did not have to deal with that. And that's something that looking back on very much makes sense. So what I learned from all of this about how ADHD works and how it relates to those symptoms I had that made me sure that this was something that probably should have been addressed by a professional and not just like, oh, I got to suck it up and walk it off. Because I already did the hard work. I proved to myself I could establish a life, but now I owe it to my family if we want to keep going. If I'm responsible for a child, I don't have the luxury of being like, I'll just suck it up. I'm going to do it my way. If there's a problem to be addressed, it is my responsibility to address it. I couldn't make excuses anymore. So one is ADHD, problem with regulation of attention, not necessarily a deficit of it. So that comes down to your executive function, which is the analogy I heard is basically like your secretary. It manages how you put out your attention, how you engage with tasks. So a good secretary is going to pace out the tasks or the people that line up wanting your attention. A shitty secretary is either going to let everybody in at once or nobody. And that's the difference between the hyper focus that can exist. Like when I was confined working on a project where I didn't have the option to do anything else and I was up against a deadline, I would find myself in hyper focus. The rest of the time, if it wasn't that extreme stimulus, it was no stimulus, which led to constant distraction, which gives you whiplash. An analogy I heard beyond that was really good was most people have a 0 to 10 dial that they can turn their attention to. And if you have ADHD, it's like you have two options. It's binary. It's either random or it's 15. And that made me laugh because that really kind of rings true. The default mode network and the task network, I heard this from Huberman's podcast, was really good. You can listen to. The default mode network is a brain circuit that's different from the task network. One is your brain at rest. And a little aside, I remember taking psilocybin once a couple years ago. And I remember the effect it had. I was in a good mood for like 3 months. It was such a profound experience. It felt like somebody power washed my brain. My entire life was better. I'm not telling you to go do that, but that was my experience. I think that's why a lot of people go that route with routinely taking those. And when I looked into it, it's because psilocybin actually does have an effect of resetting your default mode network, which is just your brain at rest. And I had a ton of intrusive thoughts. My brain at rest was either thinking about random shit, just jumbled, a barrel of monkeys going from one scene to another to thoughts from like 20 years ago. And there was no cohesion to any of it. And I was also really prone to earworms, music that gets stuck in your head. Somebody showed me Skibbity Toilet. And that song was in my head for 3 weeks to the point where I thought I needed an exorcism. I mean, I thought I needed medication for that. I'd be trying to go to bed and that song would play on a loop and I couldn't get rid of it. So the fixation on things that hurt my feelings 25 years ago, the fixation on music or other things when I couldn't just kind of exist with my thoughts was a sign to me that something was wrong. That made sense when I came across that. Now that's supposed to balance out with your task network, which deals with activity, with like planning and orienting your motivation, or inhibiting activity if you're trying not to do something. And those things are supposed to kind of seesaw, with dopamine acting as like the regulator. It's the conductor that's telling you which network should be firing, and they should be going back and forth. But in ADHD situations, they kind of synchronize. So it's like music building up on top of each other with more noise. You're getting these conflicting signals at the same time, which is no bueno. The theory is that low dopamine leads to the unnecessary firing of neurons. And that's why when you're supposed to be doing this one thing, you have complete competence in and know how to do, and you objectively understand it needs to be done, you get this array of shit firing in your head that's pulling you all kinds of different directions. Seems to make sense given that the medication seems to have alleviated a lot of those symptoms, led to an increase not just in productivity, but in kind of wellness. I have lower anxiety. I feel good. I can plan. I feel like I can use my brain the way I need to. And if you've been driving a car that's had the brake stuck, once the brake comes off, you kind of want to take it out for a test drive. And that's what I've been doing. I've just been going out, going crazy, trying to see, okay, what can I engage in now? And it's been super fun and exciting. Another thing about ADHD is emotional dysregulation, anxiety, and depression as a byproduct of these feelings of being kind of stupid or worthless or lazy, when it's not really that. It's that you're trying to run a sprint with a boot on your leg. And it can make people more sensitive. It can make them depressed. I heard from Dr. K, Healthy Gamer, likes to talk about this statistic where if you're starting with somebody with depression, there's like a very low chance of them eventually getting ADHD. It's like 3%. If you start with somebody with ADHD, it's like a 70% chance they get depression. They're very highly correlated for that reason. I can certainly relate to that quite a bit. I also can think back to points where I've been very sensitive in relationships, very insecure. And I have to wonder how much of that is a byproduct of the way my brain is worked up until now. And if this is actually going to improve that, I don't know. I'm not trying to treat this as a one-size-fits-all cure-all that your brain would otherwise operate perfectly if it wasn't for the medication. Now, the questions and controversies I have, like this is seen as kind of a boys' problem along with a lot of other things. I mean, boys are super predisposed to like cognitive impairments, like savantism is like 6-1 men to women because men have so many more of the cognitive impairments that lead to savantism, similar with autism. Boys and girls, it's diagnosed 3-1. It's said to present differently, that boys are more fidgety and hyperactive. Now, this is where controversy comes in because there's a lot of people that think ADHD as a diagnosis was like concocted as a way to rationalize giving kids medications to help them sit still in a system that wasn't built for them because boys should be out playing and roughhousing and doing all kinds of different things. And it stands to reason in nature there might be some utility to the way the brain works. So it seems weird to just say, oh no, this 5-year-old that should be doing a bunch of other things, let's make him stare at something that's insanely boring and not relevant to his life at all at this moment. And if he can't do it, let's medicate him. That seems off. Now, there's something interesting. I read this book called Boys Adrift, which it's been out for a little while, but it was talking about the difference in development between boys and girls. And we all know that girls mature faster, but it's different. It's different parts of the brain, and specifically in the language centers of the brain. And specifically in the language centers of the brain, it was said that a 5-year-old girl is on par with about a 3.5-year-old boy, meaning if you sit down and get a 3.5-year-old girl to try to sit still, focus, and read, you're probably not going to have a great time. And that's kind of comparable to how boys develop. Now, of course, it's much more complex than that, but there is direct advocacy for boys to actually stay back a year because the difference in development is so substantial, it can actually change how they associate themselves as being capable in the midst of an academic system. And that first year is so crucial in developing that relationship that it's worth it. And as somebody who graduated early, I was very eager to get to school. I was on track to graduate at 17. For some reason, my parents thought it was a good idea to skip a grade. I graduated at 16. I was 12 years old going into high school. Do not recommend it. I was fine because I was kind of taller for my height at the time. Anyways, I did okay, but I look back and I'm like, would I have had a better time if I stayed back? And I think the answer is absolutely. And that's kind of what I think about with this. Now, that's not to say that ADHD doesn't exist because boys and girls are different and this is just being dumped on boys. There is still a need, even if you are involved in something that exhausts you physically, that has you out working and exerting all of this effort. Boys still need to be able to focus and pay attention to all of these other things. There's no circumstance where you're going to be a productive adult where you don't have to focus to that degree. So I don't think it's satisfactory to say boys just need to go run it out and they're fine. And a lot of the people that engage with this say, however ominous it seems to be giving kids drugs, that the return compared to the cost seems to be a higher quality of life that is less encumbered by mental illness, by the anxiety, by the emotional dysregulation, by the negative self-concept, by the depression, that the cost versus the reward, it's not even close. That's the sense I get from professionals in the field. I have a hard time with it. I don't know how to tell people, and I shouldn't be telling people how they should view it. You should be doing your own research, but it's something that I still struggle with. I would hesitate to give my child this medication depending on the circumstances. So I don't know where I'm at with that. There's this question of, is the brain broken? And that, on the one hand, seems consistent with what I've experienced up until now. Not broken, but there's something that shouldn't be working this way. And we just like completed this circuit. We made this tweak. And now everything's up and running. It seems like it's not that simple. And it's also unsatisfactory to me because I always have high standards for myself. And I had the sense that I needed to prove I could do this on my own. I'm not satisfied to just assume it's something else, because it's very easy to always take your problems and then lean to that as a solution. It's not about whether it's true this time. It's about the precedent for moving forward. How do I engage with problems, and how quick am I to assume it's something that's just out of my control? So I always like to bias to, is this in my control? I think this was, to a degree, and I think I proved that, but I think I also showed that there was a lot that wasn't. And I think my life is going to be better having gone this route. There's a sense of cheating, which anybody who follows my fitness stuff, it sounds hypocritical because I've been open about PED use and the type of federations I compete in and what my plan is and how I engage with that stuff. But similarly, I trained and competed for 15 years before going on. I was already a national level competitor. I was pretty strong. I had shown myself what I could do, and I objectively looked at a higher height that I could potentially go to, weighed out the cost versus the benefit, and made a conscious decision. So this kind of mirrors that. I feel like myself, that turns out to be a good approach to prove that I could work around these things, to hold myself accountable to figuring it out, assuming I lived in a time where none of this technology is available, that I could still thrive. That was important to me. And once I did, it just took the edge off having to go into something that could be labeled a crutch or people might judge you for. Because at this point, what do I have to prove? It's about me doing everything I can to set my family up for the future. And that's how I rationalize this. Also, the brain seems a bit different than the body. The brain cuts to like who you are, where the body was kind of frivolous. It was like souping up a sports car. So there's that bit of difference, but that's just me. I'm not telling any of you to evaluate it that way. And the overdiagnosis thing, I don't know what to say. I don't know how we deal with that problem. That's probably true. There's a direct incentive for people to take this. We see that in college where kids are scrambling to get Adderall to get the edge and stay up on their studies. So it seems where there's an incentive to have kids do better from an earlier age, there's obviously going to be an overdiagnosis. And having gone through the onboarding process of getting this diagnosed, I can tell you it's not difficult to get a diagnosis. Somebody who wants one, the script that you tell a psychiatrist is probably pretty easy to fake if you want to come across this. It's also vague, which is something I have a problem with. Hopefully one day there is more specific ways of measuring the brain to actually get to the mechanics of this and be more fine-tuned with the way that we approach this. For right now, I don't know what the solution is. I don't know that I have one. So that's about it, guys. That's my experience with ADHD meds. So far, I mean, it's such a net positive that it doesn't even make sense to really focus on the ways that it might be a negative. And it's something that I'll probably be on for the rest of my life, or at least as long as I want to be a reasonably productive person in society. But also, I do know that if the world ended and there was no more supply of Vyvanse, I'd probably be okay. So that's kind of a powerful position to be in. So let me know questions you have, comments, experiences. Let me know what your experience is with ADHD meds. Do you have an experience that was like mine, or did you have some completely different one? Leave it in the comments. Thanks for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.